7 Psychological Signs of Women with Unshakable Spiritual Strength. Have you ever encountered a woman whose presence seemed to transcend the ordinary confines of human experience? Someone whose spiritual fortitude appeared almost otherworldly in its steadfastness. In our daily lives, we often find ourselves overwhelmed by the ceaseless demands of existence, caught in the tumultuous current of sensory experiences that Kant would categorize as mere phenomena, the appearances of things rather than their true essence. Most of us struggle to connect with what Kant called the noumenal realm, that deeper reality that exists beyond our sensory perception, and we feel a profound disconnect between our spiritual aspirations and our lived experience. The complex philosophical framework that Kant established to understand human experience often seems impenetrable, creating a barrier between his profound insights and their practical application in understanding the spiritual dimension of human existence, particularly as it manifests in women who have cultivated extraordinary inner strength. Perhaps you've felt that inadequacy yourself, that sense of grasping at profound truths about human spirituality only to find them slipping through your fingers like water. I promise that by the end of this exploration, you'll not only understand how Kant's critical philosophy can illuminate the psychological markers of profound spiritual resilience in women, but you'll also possess a framework for recognizing and perhaps cultivating these qualities in your own life. The knowledge we're about to share won't merely expand your intellectual understanding of Kantian ethics and metaphysics. It will transform how you perceive spiritual strength in yourself and others, particularly in women who exemplify these qualities. Understanding these concepts now, rather than postponing this knowledge, can immediately enhance your ability to recognize authentic spiritual depth and distinguish it from its many counterfeits. Join me as we embark on this philosophical journey to uncover the 7 psychological signs of women with unshakable spiritual strength, viewed through the illuminating lens of Immanuel Kant's revolutionary philosophy. The first psychological sign of women with unshakable spiritual strength, viewed through a Kantian perspective, is their remarkable capacity for moral autonomy. Kant believed that true freedom lies not in doing whatever one desires, but in acting according to self-imposed rational principles that could serve as universal laws. When we observe women who possess extraordinary spiritual fortitude, we invariably notice their independence from external validation and societal expectations. They navigate life guided by an internal moral compass that transcends cultural conditioning and circumstantial pressures. Consider how, in your own experience, you may have encountered women who make difficult choices not because they are expedient or popular, but because they align with principles they would willingly see universalized. This is the essence of Kant's categorical imperative in action, the principle that one should act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. The spiritually formidable woman demonstrates this autonomy not through rebellion or defiance, but through a quiet certainty about her moral foundations that remains unshaken even when confronted with opposition or isolation. She recognizes that true freedom emerges not from the absence of constraints, but from the conscious choice to bind oneself to principles worthy of universal application. This moral autonomy becomes particularly evident during crises, when the pressures to compromise one's values for safety or acceptance are most intense. The woman of spiritual strength remains steadfast, not from stubbornness, but from a profound recognition that compromising her moral autonomy would diminish not only her own humanity, but also undermine the moral fabric that binds humanity together. In this way, her personal choices take on a transpersonal significance, embodying Kant's kingdom of ends, where each person is treated never merely as a means, but always as an end in themselves. I want to pause here and ask you directly, how often have you found yourself struggling to maintain your moral autonomy in a world that constantly pressures you to conform to external expectations? That feeling that there must be something more foundational than social approval to guide your actions, but that somehow remains elusive in your daily decisions. You are not alone. Many of us carry this silent questioning, this desire to truly understand how we might establish and maintain the kind of uncompromising moral foundation that Kant proposed. I would love for you to share your experience in the comments. It could be as simple as, "My greatest challenge with moral autonomy is EAs." Your comment not only helps me create content more directly addressing your real needs, but also creates a community where others, who might be facing the same obstacles as you, can feel understood and less alone in their philosophical journey. It is through this sincere exchange that we grow together. So, please pause the video for a moment and share your experience. Your voice matters more than you might imagine. The second sign manifests as a profound respect for the dignity of rational beings, including oneself. Kant's moral philosophy centers on the recognition that rational beings possess inherent value and dignity that is not contingent on their utility, attractiveness, or social status. Women with spiritual depth embody this principle through their consistent respect for others' autonomy and their refusal to manipulate or exploit others as mere means to an end. This respect extends beyond mere politeness or consideration. It is a fundamental recognition of the sacred nature of each person's capacity for rational choice and moral action. Such women do not engage in manipulation, emotional coercion, or the subtle forms of control that characterize many human relationships. Instead, they approach others with a genuine openness to their humanity, creating spaces where authentic connection and growth can occur. Equally important, they extend this same respect to themselves, refusing to sacrifice their own dignity even when doing so might bring temporary advantages or approval. In everyday life, this manifests as healthy boundaries, honest communication, and a willingness to stand alone rather than compromise one's integrity for acceptance. The spiritually strong woman understands intuitively what Kant articulated philosophically, that dignity is not earned through achievement or bestowed by social recognition, but is intrinsic to our nature as rational beings capable of moral choice. The third sign emerges in how these women orient themselves toward knowledge and truth. Kant's epistemology distinguished between phenomena, the world as it appears to our senses, and noumena, the reality that exists beyond our perception. Women of profound spiritual strength demonstrate an exceptional capacity to recognize the limitations of their own knowledge while maintaining an unwavering commitment to seeking truth. They embody intellectual humility not as a form of self-deprecation, but as a clear-eyed recognition of the boundaries of human understanding. This humility paradoxically becomes a source of strength, allowing them to remain open to new information without feeling threatened by challenges to their existing beliefs. They approach knowledge not as a possession to be defended, but as a horizon to be expanded. At the same time, they refuse to surrender to intellectual nihilism or relativism, maintaining that objective truth exists even if our access to it is always mediated by our limited perspective. In conversations, you might notice how these women listen deeply before responding, how they can acknowledge the partial validity of opposing viewpoints without abandoning their own principles, and how they distinguish between opinions based on preference and judgments that make claims about reality. This balance between epistemic humility and commitment to truth enables them to navigate complex moral and intellectual terrain without becoming dogmatic or rudderless. The fourth psychological marker is a distinctive relationship with duty and obligation that transcends both rigid rule-following and situational ethics. Kant famously placed duty at the center of his moral philosophy, arguing that the moral worth of an action derives not from its consequences, but from its being performed from duty to the moral law. Women with unshakable spiritual strength exhibit what might be called a joyful embrace of duty, rather than a grudging submission to obligation. They recognize obligations not as burdensome impositions from without, but as expressions of their own rational nature and dignity. This transforms how they approach responsibilities in relationships, work, and community engagement. Rather than oscillating between resentful compliance and impulsive freedom, they discover genuine autonomy precisely in their freely chosen commitments. You might recognize this quality in women who fulfill difficult caregiving roles without martyrdom or resentment, who persevere in demanding work because it aligns with their values rather than external rewards, or who maintain commitments even when doing so brings no immediate benefit or recognition. This is not grim stoicism, but a serene alignment between what Kant called the ought and the is, where external obligation becomes indistinguishable from internal inclination. Such women do not need to be praised or recognized for doing their duty, because the fulfillment of that duty already constitutes its own reward through the affirmation of their rational nature. The fifth sign manifests in how these women navigate the complex relationship between happiness and moral worth. Kant recognized that while happiness is a natural human desire, making it the basis of morality would ultimately undermine both ethics and satisfaction. Women of exceptional spiritual fortitude seem to intuitively grasp this distinction, pursuing what Kant called the highest good, where happiness and moral worthiness align. They neither sacrifice their principles for pleasure or comfort, nor do they embrace a joyless moralism that denies the value of happiness. Instead, they cultivate what we might call a eudaimonic approach to well-being, where satisfaction emerges not from the direct pursuit of pleasure, but as a byproduct of living in accordance with one's deepest values. This manifests as a distinctive form of resilience in the face of suffering. Rather than being crushed by adversity or becoming bitter when their moral choices lead to personal costs, these women maintain an inner equilibrium that transcends circumstantial happiness without denying the genuine pain of difficult experiences. They embody what Kant described as worthiness to be happy, focusing first on living with integrity and treating happiness not as an entitlement, but as a welcome companion to a life well lived. In their presence, one senses neither the desperate pursuit of pleasure that characterizes hedonism, nor the denial of joy that marks asceticism, but rather a serene acceptance of both the pleasures and pains that accompany a life of principle. The sixth psychological sign appears in these women's orientation toward the sublime and the beautiful, categories that Kant explored extensively in his aesthetic theory. Women with profound spiritual strength exhibit a unique capacity to appreciate and embody both dimensions of experience. The sublime, for Kant, refers to experiences that overwhelm our sensory capacities and gesture toward the infinite, while the beautiful involves harmony, proportion, and finite perfection. Spiritually formidable women embrace the sublime aspects of existence, finding meaning in experiences of awe, transcendence, and even constructive fear that reveals the limitations of our physical nature while pointing toward our super-sensible dignity. They do not shy away from contemplating mortality, infinity, or the overwhelming power of nature and cosmos. Simultaneously, they cultivate an appreciation for the beautiful in everyday life, finding significance in moments of harmony, balance, and grace. This dual appreciation manifests in their approach to challenges, where they can acknowledge the sometimes terrifying magnitude of suffering, while discovering beauty in the human capacity to endure and create meaning. It appears in their aesthetic sensibilities, which neither trivialize art as mere decoration nor worship it as a substitute for religious transcendence. And it shapes their spirituality, which embraces both the mysterious vastness of ultimate reality and the intimate beauty of particular manifestations of goodness and truth in human experience. The seventh and final sign of women with unshakable spiritual strength is their orientation toward what Kant called the three great questions of human existence. What can I know? What ought I to do? What may I hope? Unlike those who fragment these questions, addressing them through disconnected intellectual, ethical, and spiritual frameworks, these women maintain a unified approach that recognizes the interdependence of epistemology, ethics, and hope. They pursue knowledge with moral purpose rather than as an end in itself, recognizing that what we can know is inextricably linked to how we ought to live. They ground their ethical choices not merely in abstract principles, but in a vision of hope that gives those principles meaning and sustainability. And they cultivate hope not as wishful thinking, but as a rational faith in the ultimate compatibility of virtue and happiness, what Kant called the postulates of practical reason. This integration manifests as a remarkable consistency across different domains of life, where their intellectual pursuits, moral choices, and sources of hope form a coherent whole rather than compartmentalized fragments. It produces a distinctive kind of wisdom that transcends both academic knowledge and practical cleverness. A wisdom that recognizes the limits of human understanding while affirming the ultimate meaningfulness of moral action in a universe that remains partially opaque to our comprehension. In the presence of such women, one senses neither the fragmented specialization of modern expertise nor the vague generalities of popular spirituality, but rather a unified vision that honors both the distinctness and the interconnection of truth, goodness, and beauty. If you have ever felt overwhelmed by the complexities of philosophical thought, know that you are not alone in this journey. The path to understanding Kant's insights on spiritual strength does not have to be solitary or confusing. I invite you to subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of people who, like you, Seek clarity amidst the whirlwind of fragmented information about philosophy and spirituality. By subscribing, you'll receive weekly reflections that transform seemingly inaccessible concepts into practical insights for your life. We are not merely studying philosophy, we are learning to think with greater depth, to question with more wisdom, and to live with more purpose. Click the subscription button now, not as an obligation, but as a gift to your own intellectual and spiritual development. And if this content has brought some clarity to you today, leave your like as a way of saying that we are together in this quest for true knowledge. Remember, understanding the philosophical foundations of spiritual strength is not just an academic exercise. It is a way of awakening to a more conscious and authentic existence that honors both the rational and transcendent dimensions of human experience. As we conclude our exploration of the 7 psychological signs of women with unshakable spiritual strength through Kant's philosophical lens, we return to where we began. The challenge of bridging the gap between abstract philosophical principles and lived human experience. Kant himself recognized that his critical philosophy, while intellectually rigorous, risked becoming detached from the practical wisdom needed to navigate life's complexities. Yet, in observing women who embody exceptional spiritual fortitude, we glimpse how his insights can be not merely understood, but embodied and lived. The moral autonomy, respect for rational dignity, epistemic humility, joyful embrace of duty, integration of happiness and moral worth, appreciation for the sublime and beautiful, and unified approach to knowledge, ethics, and hope that characterize these women offer us a vision of Kantian principles in action. They remind us that philosophy, at its best, is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a practical guide to living with greater awareness and integrity. As you encounter such women in your own life, or perhaps recognize these qualities emerging within yourself, remember that spiritual strength in the Kantian sense is neither a fixed trait nor an unattainable ideal, but a continuous practice of aligning one's choices with rational principles that honor both our limitations and our transcendent potential. The journey towards such alignment is never complete, but in the effort itself, we discover a dignity and purpose that transcends the contingencies of circumstance and connects us to what is most fundamentally human in ourselves and others. In this recognition lies the beginning of wisdom and the foundation of a spiritual strength that, while never perfect, remains truly unshakable in a world of constant change.